The cabin was supposed to be a fresh start. Just me and my new roommate, Tara, spending a weekend in the woods to get away from everything. We'd known each other for a few months, but I wasn't sure how we'd fare in such an isolated setting. We'd only been living together for a short time, but things had been fine. A little awkward at times. Sure, getting used to someone else's habits in close quarters is always a bit strange, but I was hopeful. It seemed like the kind of place that could be a reset, a peaceful break from city life. I had seen the cabin listed online, tucked in a forested area near a small town a few hours from where we lived. It was cheap for the location, which made it even more appealing. The description spoke of rustic charm, of cozy nights by the fire, of hiking trails nearby. There were no neighbors within miles. The perfect escape from the grind of daily life. A chance for us to relax and unwind. When we arrived, the cabin was everything I had imagined and more. Weathered wood, a small porch, and thick trees surrounding the property like a wall. I could already feel a strange kind of serenity in the air, something that made me believe that this trip was exactly what we needed. Tara and I unloaded our bags from the car, the autumn chill in the air mixing with the earthy scent of pine and moss. The sky was a pale blue, and the sun was low, casting long shadows across the forest floor. The silence was deafening, but in a good way. It wasn't the usual city hum, but something deeper, more natural. Inside, the cabin was small but charming. The living room had a stone fireplace at one end, and the wooden floors creaked under our feet as we moved around. The kitchen was off to the side, a rustic stove with a refrigerator that made a low hum when it kicked on. We could see the mountains in the distance through the windows. It was quiet, too quiet almost, but that only added to the sense of peacefulness. It felt like we were in another world, disconnected from the hustle and bustle of everything else. The first evening went smoothly. Tara and I spent time setting up the cabin, arranging our things, and getting comfortable. We ate some quick dinner, had a couple of drinks, and settled in front of the fireplace. We talked about our lives, our pasts, and what we expected from this trip. There were a few awkward silences, but nothing major. It felt like just another evening between friends, one where we were learning a bit more about each other. It wasn't until later that night when things began to feel off. We had gone to bed, and I remember lying in the quiet, trying to fall asleep. The cabin was colder than I expected. Despite the fire, it felt like the chill in the air was seeping through the walls. I could hear Tara moving around in her room. The house creaked occasionally, which was normal for an old cabin, but there was something unsettling about it that I couldn't place. I tried to ignore it, told myself it was just the wind, the settling of the old wood, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Around 2 a.m., I woke up to a strange noise. It wasn't loud, but it was persistent. A soft scraping sound, like something dragging against the wood. I sat up, straining to hear. It didn't come from the wind. It was closer. It was in the cabin. My stomach dropped as I listened carefully. It was coming from the hallway, just outside my door. I told myself it was just the house settling, or maybe an animal outside scratching at the door. But the longer I listened, the more it didn't seem like either. There was a rhythm to it, like something or someone was deliberately making the noise, dragging something heavy against the floor. I grabbed my phone, the screen barely lighting up the room as I turned it on. My heartbeat was thudding in my chest. I texted Tara, asking if she had heard it, but there was no response. I waited a few moments, but when nothing came through, I decided to get up and check. The house was eerily quiet now, the scraping sound gone, replaced by the low, constant hum of the fridge. I stepped into the hallway, holding my phone out in front of me. The light from the screen was weak, but it illuminated just enough for me to make out the dim outline of the cabin's structure. The air felt colder here, like something had shifted. I walked slowly toward Tara's room, stopping in front of her door. I raised my hand to knock, but before I could, I heard something, soft footsteps moving from inside the room. My blood ran cold. I pressed my ear to the door. The footsteps stopped. My mind raced, thinking about possible explanations. Was it just the floorboards shifting? Maybe Tara had gotten up for some reason? But no, this felt wrong. The silence on the other side of the door, the way the footsteps stopped so abruptly, it didn't feel natural. I slowly pushed the door open, the creaking of the hinges sounding far too loud in the stillness. Tara's room was empty. The bed was undisturbed, the covers neatly pulled back. The window was open just a crack, but there was no sign of her. I took a step into the room, confusion washing over me. I called out her name, but my voice felt muffled, as if the cabin was swallowing the sound. I turned, half expecting her to be behind me, but when I looked down the hall, I saw nothing. I moved back into the living room, now fully awake and fully aware of how strange everything felt. The house was still cold, too cold, and there was a lingering unease in the air that I couldn't shake. I looked at the door that led outside. Something didn't sit right about it. I thought I had locked it earlier, but now, I wasn't so sure. I made my way to the door, reaching for the handle. The moment my hand touched it, I felt the cold seeping through the wood, the same cold that had filled the cabin since I arrived. I took a deep breath and opened the door, peering out into the dark night. The porch was empty, just a few shadows cast by the dim light outside. Nothing unusual, nothing to suggest someone had been out there. But then I noticed it, the ground was disturbed. Not by much, but enough to make me pause. The dirt had been scuffed, almost as if someone had been walking around in the dark, dragging something heavy. I stepped outside, the chill of the night air biting at my skin. My breath came in clouds, sharp against the cold. I looked around, trying to get my bearings, but the darkness felt suffocating. I walked to the edge of the porch, glancing back toward the woods. There was nothing, no movement, no sign of anything or anyone. I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of the night pressing down on me. I thought about going back inside, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The noises, Tara's absence, it all felt like something I couldn't explain. I turned back toward the cabin, and that's when I saw it. A figure, standing just outside the cabin, barely visible in the shadows. I froze. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It was just there, watching. My stomach twisted into knots. I backed up slowly, keeping my eyes on the figure. My hand reached for the door handle, but my mind was racing. Was it Tara? Had she been outside all this time, moving around in the dark? But no, something about it didn't fit. This wasn't her. I didn't look away, couldn't look away, even though every part of me screamed to run. The figure remained still, as if waiting for me to do something, to make a move. Finally, the silence broke. Not with a sound, but with the figure shifting slightly, just enough for me to see its shape more clearly in the dim light. It wasn't Tara. I slammed the door shut, locking it with trembling hands. My heart was hammering in my chest, and I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what was happening or what was out there. I stayed in the cabin the rest of the night, too afraid to leave, too afraid to search for Tara or figure out where she had gone. I didn't sleep. The minutes dragged on, each one heavier than the last. Eventually, the sun rose, but it didn't bring me any comfort. I could barely bring myself to go back outside. By the time morning light filtered through the trees, I finally found her. Tara was back in her room, lying in bed as if nothing had happened. No explanation, no signs of where she had been or what she had done. I left the cabin that day. We didn't talk much, and we didn't ever come back. The cabin was still there, untouched, and I'm not sure why I left without saying anything to Tara, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been watching us that night, and I never want to be in that cabin again. I decided to rent a cabin up in the mountains for a week. It was early autumn, right before the leaves had completely turned. I had some time off from work, and I didn't want to be around people. I was feeling worn down, and the idea of no cell signal, no emails, no traffic, and no city noise sounded perfect. I found a small listing online. The place was about 2 hours away from the nearest town, a one-bedroom wooden cabin tucked deep into a thicket of tall pines. The guy I rented it from had emailed me a PDF with instructions, including how to find the unmarked turnoff that led to the long dirt road. It looked clean in the pictures, the kind of place with a porch swing and a wood-burning stove. I I packed some books, my camp stove, a few changes of clothes, some canned food, and my hiking gear. I left early in the morning and made it up there by early afternoon. The road got narrower the further I drove. It was mostly gravel and some packed dirt. At one point, I had to drive over a fallen tree branch, and it scraped the underside of my car. When I finally pulled up to the cabin, I saw it was just like the pictures. A small A-frame surrounded by trees. It looked weathered but solid. The air smelled like damp leaves and pine. The only sounds were wind and birds. I unloaded my stuff and got the place set up. The front door stuck a little, like it was warped. The inside was one big room with a small kitchen area, a couch, a wood stove, and a table. The bedroom was in a loft up above. I checked everything out. The windows had screens but no curtains. There was a stack of firewood on the porch and some more under a tarp in the back. The water came from a well with a pump. No electricity, just a couple of battery-powered lanterns and some candles. The first day passed quietly. I made a small fire in the stove when the sun started to go down. I read for a while, had some soup, and sat out on the porch swing listening to the woods. It was colder than I expected at night, but I had brought a good sleeping bag. That night I fell asleep quickly, the stove still glowing a bit. The second day I went for a long hike. There weren't any trails, just old logging paths and game tracks. I carried a compass and marked a few trees with tape as I went. I walked for maybe 4 hours just exploring. I found an old metal drum half buried in leaves and a rusted hunting stand in a tree. Back at the cabin, I made another fire and boiled some water for pasta. It started raining a little that night, so I stayed inside. It was on the third night that I noticed something odd. I had gone out to get more wood from the pile out back, and I found a boot print in the mud. Not mine. It was larger and deeper. I looked around but didn't see anyone. Could have been old. Maybe someone had been there before me. Still, I felt strange the rest of the evening. I kept the lantern close and didn't sleep as well. Around 2 in the morning, I heard a noise outside. Just a dull thud. I sat up in my sleeping bag and listened. Nothing. A few minutes later, another thud. I didn't hear any footsteps, just that sound. I stayed awake for over an hour, ears straining. Eventually, I must have dozed off again. In the morning, I went outside and checked around. The porch had a small, dark mark on the wood, like something had been dropped there. I looked for more prints, but the rain had erased anything that might have been in the dirt. I told myself it was probably just a branch falling or an animal. I kept busy the rest of the day. Read more, chopped some kindling, and wrote in my journal. But I started feeling watched. That evening, I locked the door with the bolt and wedged a chair under the knob. I placed one of the hatchets I brought next to my sleeping bag. It was dead quiet that night, the kind of silence that makes your ears ring. Then, just before dawn, I heard scratching. Very light, slow scratching on one of the walls. Not at the door. It sounded like it was coming from the back of the cabin. I sat there, heart pounding. The scratching would stop for a bit, then start again. A soft, dry sound. I didn't move until the sun came up. When I went outside, I found long scuff marks near the back window. About waist high. They looked like they could have been from a stick or maybe even fingers. I didn't see anyone. I circled the cabin slowly, trying to make sense of it. I didn't have any way to call anyone. No signal. No phone line. The road was too long to walk, especially if something was wrong. I didn't want to leave just yet. I figured maybe it was just an animal, a raccoon or something. Still, I didn't go hiking that day. I stayed near the cabin and kept a small fire going even during the day. I kept checking behind me every few minutes. Every time the wind rustled the trees, I twitched. That night, I didn't sleep at all. I kept the lantern lit and stayed downstairs. Around midnight, I heard a creak on the porch. Just one. Then nothing. Then another creak. I couldn't bring myself to go to the window. I just sat there in the dark, gripping the hatchet. My legs started to cramp, but I didn't move. Eventually, the sounds stopped. When the sun came up, I went outside. Nothing on the porch. No marks. No prints. Nothing. On the 5th day, I packed everything back into the car. I planned to leave that afternoon. But when I tried to start the car, nothing happened. The engine clicked but wouldn't turn over. I checked the hood. The battery cables were intact. I didn't know enough to do more than that. I checked the gas tank half full. I tried again and again, but the engine wouldn't catch. I went back inside. I remember feeling this sharp drop in my gut, like the world suddenly got heavier. I was stuck out there. I kept trying to convince myself it was just a mechanical problem, but the timing was too strange. I decided I'd hike out the next morning. I could make it to the turnoff in a few hours if I left early. That night, I barely used the lantern. I wanted to stay hidden. I pulled the small table in front of the door and moved the couch to block the window. I climbed up to the loft and laid down on the floor with the sleeping bag. I didn't even use the stove. Sometime after midnight, I heard the porch creak again. Then it was quiet for a long time. I thought maybe whoever was out there had left. But then I heard it, a soft tap on the wall. Then another tap from the other side of the cabin, like they were circling it. Top, tap, top. I didn't move. I didn't even breathe. Then I heard something brush the side of the house, like fabric or skin. Couldn't tell. There was a soft scuffing near the window. I held the hatchet tight, hands sweating. Then silence. I must have passed out from fear or exhaustion. When I woke up, it was light outside. I grabbed my pack and left everything else behind. I jogged most of the way down the road. Branches scratched my arms and face. I didn't stop until I saw the main road. I flagged down a truck and the guy gave me a ride into town. I didn't say much, just that my car broke down. A few days later, I went back with a tow truck. The driver stayed close to me the whole time. When we got to the cabin, the front door was wide open. The couch had been moved back. My lantern was gone. My sleeping bag was gone. Everything else was still there. Food, stove, clothes. Just those things missing. The tow truck guy looked at me, but I didn't explain. He hooked up the car, turned the key. The engine started right up. No issues at all. I didn't rent another cabin after that. I didn't tell anyone what happened, but I think about it a lot. Whoever was out there didn't want the cabin. They wanted me to leave, and they waited until I did. That's what keeps me up some nights. The thought that they were watching the whole time, just waiting to see how long I'd last before I broke. I bought the cabin site unseen. It was cheap, listed online by some out-of-state estate company that didn't seem too concerned with paperwork. The photos were grainy and from odd angles, like they were taken in a hurry, but I didn't care. I'd been looking for a place to fix up and flip, and this seemed like the perfect shot. Deep in the woods, far off the main road, no neighbors in sight. That's how I liked it. I drove out the week after closing. Took hours to reach the place. First paved roads, then gravel, then dirt. The last half mile was more like a trail than a road, full of potholes and overgrown brush. When I finally saw the cabin through the trees, it looked exactly how I imagined. Rundown, yes, but solid. Wood siding, tin roof, a chimney that leaned a little to the left. No broken windows, which was rare. The front steps were rotted through, but the door opened without much force. Inside smelled like mold, dust, and mice. The air was still. Cold, too, even though it was the middle of spring. I walked the main room slowly, taking in the creaking floorboards, the low ceilings, the old wood stove in the corner. There was a kitchenette to one side, a bedroom off to the back. Most of the furniture was still there, old, heavy, ugly stuff that probably hadn't been moved in decades. I made mental notes. Rip out the flooring, update the kitchen, repaint everything. I'd done worse jobs. I spent the first 2 days just cleaning. Pulled out rugs, swept, vacuumed, bagged up trash. I didn't find anything strange at first. Just old junk, beer cans, rusted tools, dead batteries. The kind of stuff you'd expect from a cabin used for hunting and not much else. But on the third day, I started pulling up the floors in the main room. The boards were warped and buckling from moisture. I had to pry them up one by one with a crowbar. That's when I found the steel. It was under a cheap, stained rug that had been nailed down around the edges. First, I thought it was just a sheet of metal, but when I cleared more space around it, I saw it was actually a door. A square panel with thick hinges on one side and a bolted latch on the other. It didn't fit with the rest of the cabin. Everything else was old wood and rust. This was solid, almost industrial. It was painted black or maybe just coated in grime. I could feel the cold coming off it. I stood over it for a long time. The bolt was rusted but still locked. I got down on my knees and shined my flashlight into the cracks around the edges. There was no light leaking through from below, just darkness. I tapped it with the end of the crowbar. It echoed hollow underneath. Curiosity got the better of me. I used penetrating oil on the bolt, waited an hour, then went back at it with a wrench. Took everything I had, but it finally gave with a screech that hurt my teeth. I lifted the door slowly. It was heavy, and the hinges groaned the whole way. Beneath was a narrow set of concrete stairs leading straight down into blackness.
No lights, no handrail.
Just about 10 steps that disappeared into a void. I got my headlamp and a backup flashlight, climbed down carefully. The air down there was colder, thicker, the kind that felt like it hadn't moved in years. It didn't smell rotten, just dead, like something had been sealed off and forgotten. At the bottom was a small square room. The walls, floor, and ceiling were all concrete.
No windows, no vents.
It was completely silent. In the middle of the room was a single chair, steel frame bolted to the floor. Heavy leather straps hung from the arms and legs, facing a blank wall. I didn't move. I just stood there, trying to understand it. The chair looked old, but not abandoned. It didn't have dust or cobwebs on it. The straps were dry and intact. The bolts were tight, no rust. Someone had used this room for something, and they had taken care of it. But there were no signs of what that something was. No blood, no stains. Just the chair and the wall it faced. I checked the corners, the ceiling. There were no cameras, no wires, no shelves. Just a drain in the floor, about 6 inches wide, with a steel grate. I knelt beside it and tried to see through. Couldn't. Just darkness. That night, I didn't sleep. I stayed upstairs, sitting on the couch I hadn't thrown out yet, listening for sounds that didn't come. My tools were by the door. I kept a hammer in my lap. Every creak of the wood made me grip it tighter. In the morning, I went back down. Same room, same chair. Still nothing moved. I checked again, trying to figure out what it was. Was this some kind of therapy room? A punishment chamber? Something for interrogation? But who would build that under a hunting cabin? Who would need it out here? I thought about sealing it back up, forgetting it was there. I could bolt the door, lay new boards over it, and sell the cabin without a word. No one would know, but that didn't sit right. So I called the county office. I told them I found what looked like an old bunker under the property. They said they'd send someone out. 2 days later, a sheriff's deputy and a county inspector showed up. I walked them through the cabin, down into the room. The deputy didn't say much. The inspector just looked around, took notes. Then they asked if I'd mind leaving the property for a few hours while they checked some things. When I came back, they were gone. But the steel door had been rebolted, and there was a new lock on it, one I hadn't put there. I tried calling the number they'd given me. No answer. I tried again the next day. Still nothing. A week went by, then 2. No word from the county. I drove to the office in person, but the guy I spoke to said there was no record of any visit to my property. No notes, no report, no inspection. I didn't go back down after that. I thought about cutting the lock, but I knew better. Someone didn't want that room opened again. Someone with more power than me. So I finished the cabin. New floors, new paint, updated kitchen. I worked fast. Sold it within a month to a couple from out of state. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't give them a reason to. I left the new key on the counter and drove away. It's been a year. I still think about the chair, the straps, the silence in that room. Whatever happened down there, it wasn't meant to be found. And maybe that's for the best. But sometimes I wonder if the couple who bought the place ever found that steel door. If they heard the stories, if they asked around, or if someone already made sure they didn't. Started as a break I thought I needed. I had been grinding through 10-hour shifts for months without a single day off. And when the burnout started creeping in, snapping at coworkers, waking up with a tight chest, forgetting basic things, I knew I had to step back. My wife supported it. She even found the place. It was a public-use forest cabin up north, tucked between two state trails in a wildlife preserve area. It had no electricity, no plumbing, and no other human structure for miles. A wood stove, a table, a bunk, and a journal by the door filled with thank yous and visitor sketches. That was it. But it was perfect. Peaceful. It gave off that cold wood smell I remembered from fishing trips with my dad. The kind of place that feels like time stops. I got there in the late afternoon. The drive had been long and winding through dirt roads, and I had to park at a gate and hike the last mile with my gear in a sled. When I first saw the cabin, it almost blended in with the trees behind it. Just aged logs and a faded roof, partially covered in snow. But it was clean. Someone had been keeping it up. I spent the first few hours chopping firewood, unpacking, setting up the little propane stove, and walking the immediate area. There were fresh animal tracks in the snow, maybe deer or moose, and I found an old fire pit out back buried under a drift. By nightfall, I was warming Ken's stew and thinking I might extend my stay to 3 nights. That first night, I slept hard. I hadn't realized how long it had been since I heard nothing but wind and the occasional creak of trees.
No Homem Fridge, no Sirens, no Negurs TV.
Just quiet. The next day, I hiked. I didn't go far, maybe 3 or 4 miles along the western ridge. I didn't see a soul. It was late February, so not a lot of hikers or hunters were out. I marked my path in the snow and even left my bright gloves hanging on a low branch just in case. But I never felt lost. It was just calm. But that night was different. I had been in the cabin for about an hour after dinner when I noticed a light through the trees. Just faint, like someone waving a flashlight far off in the woods. I figured it was reflection from a distant snowmobile or a camper on another trail. But it was odd. The beam didn't move like a snowmobile's headlight would. It flicked side to side, stopping now and then. I stood at the small window, peering out for 10 minutes before it faded. No sound, no engine. I tried to brush it off, but my stomach had that low, dragging feeling, like when you've almost been in a car accident. I texted my wife, just something simple. Saw a weird light outside. Could be another camper. She didn't reply right away, and I didn't expect her to. I put more wood in the stove and laid down with my headlamp on, trying to read. But every time I heard the wind shift or the wood settle, I flinched. Around midnight, I heard footsteps. Not animals. They were too slow and spaced out, crunching through snow, moving just around the left side of the cabin. I sat up. I hadn't locked the door. There wasn't a real lock, just a latch. I turned off my headlamp and waited. They stopped. I texted her again. I think someone's out there. Then, I'm being watched. I know I am. The reply buzzed in. What do you mean? Call me. But I didn't want to make noise. I just kept texting. Told her about the footsteps. Told her to call the local ranger station in the morning if she didn't hear from me. I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner farthest from the windows, boots on, coat zipped, and waited. Nothing more happened that night. The sun came up behind thick clouds. The light barely changed in the cabin. My body ached from staying tensed up for hours. I went outside. The footsteps were there, partially filled in from the wind, but they'd circled the cabin. Twice. No clear prints, just indentations. Too large and wide for deer, and not a bear. Packed. I knew I wasn't staying another night. I told myself I'd head back to the car and drive to a nearby motel. It was around 9 when I heard the sound again. Movement in the woods. This time, it wasn't just steps. It was branches snapping. Fast, inconsistent movement. I looked out and caught another light between the trees. That was enough. I shoved the rest of my gear into the sled and started dragging it down the path. The snow was deeper than before, and I was burning energy too fast. Every few steps, I looked back. I didn't see anyone, but that didn't matter. I felt them. That same feeling you get when someone stands too close in a grocery store line. Primal, heavy awareness. My phone buzzed again. Are you okay? Please call me. But I had no bars. The trail curved near a frozen creek, and that's where I think I messed up. I must have wandered off the main trail without realizing it. The snow was uneven, and the trees were packed too tight. My sled hit a root and tipped, spilling half my stuff. I grabbed what I could, but my gloves and backup food were gone under the drift. That's when I saw the figure. Not clear, just a shape in the trees, too tall to be natural, standing still, facing me, not moving. I didn't wait. I ran. I don't know how far I made it. I remember losing a boot, then my hat. My chest hurt from cold air and panic. The world spun with white, trees, and fear. I don't remember falling. When they found me, I was face down in the snow 1.5 miles from the cabin. Shoeless, fingernails broken and packed with frozen dirt. I had been trying to dig under a rotted log, maybe thinking I could hide beneath it. They said hypothermia had set in. My temperature had dropped dangerously low. I spent 3 days in the hospital. My wife sat with me through most of it. She had gotten my messages and called the rangers that morning. They found the cabin undisturbed. No signs of forced entry, nothing damaged. Just my sled, tipped over on the trail. No one else was found. No tracks that led away, just mine. They ruled it as exposure and disorientation. Said I probably panicked and imagined things after a night alone. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. Something or someone was out there, watching, waiting. And if I had stayed one more night, I don't think I'd be here to write this. I won't go back to the woods again. Not alone. Not ever. I bought the cabin in the middle of nowhere. It was cheap, too cheap, really. A guy had owned it before me, some hunter who clearly didn't care much for maintenance. The place was a mess, but that was fine. I wasn't scared of putting in the work. I loved the idea of turning something old and forgotten into a place I could call my own. The location was perfect, tucked away in a patch of woods, miles from any neighbors, with just a dirt road leading in. I knew from the start that I had my work cut out for me. The walls were lined with old, yellowed wallpaper, peeling away at the edges. The floors were warped, and there were stains in every corner. A lot of it was just age, but some parts made me wonder what had happened here over the years. I pushed those thoughts aside and started tearing up the old floorboards. It was the second room I got to that really caught my attention. It was the living room near the back, right by the window where the view out into the woods was most open. The old boards creaked as I pulled them up, one by one. Some came off easier than others, and I spent hours pulling them up. It wasn't until the last section that I noticed something strange. A rug that was clearly out of place. The rug was an ugly thing, threadbare, worn down in patches. It was heavy, too, thicker than the others I'd found in the cabin. Curiosity got the best of me, and I pulled it back, expecting to find a mess of dirt and old nails underneath. But instead, I found a steel door. It wasn't like any kind of trapdoor I'd seen before. This one was solid, smooth, and clearly bolted shut with rusted steel bolts. There were no handles or hinges, just a flat surface that didn't fit the old, warped floorboards. I stood there for a moment, staring at it. There was no obvious reason for it to be there, and I had no clue what could be hidden under the floor of this rundown cabin. My first instinct was to leave it alone. It seemed out of place and, honestly, a little unnerving. But I had come this far with the cabin renovations, and something about that door tugged at me. It seemed wrong to leave it shut. I spent the next couple of hours prying at the bolts. They were rusted tight, and I had to use all sorts of tools, crowbar, wrench, hammer, just to get them to loosen. My hands were sore by the time I managed to get the last bolt out, but the door still wouldn't budge. It was only when I grabbed the crowbar again and jammed it in between the steel and the floorboards that it finally cracked open with a screech. The smell that came out when the door lifted was unlike anything I'd ever smelled before. A stale, musty, almost metallic scent that made my stomach turn. The door opened with a slow, groaning motion, and I stepped back, feeling a shiver crawl up my spine. Underneath it was a narrow, steep set of stairs leading down into the darkness. I could barely see anything below, but the air that came from the hole was cold and damp, like it hadn't been disturbed in years. A small, single light bulb hung down from the ceiling at the base of the stairs, but it didn't do much to help the eerie feeling settling in my gut. I hesitated. Something about the stairs made me uneasy. But then, a strange curiosity took hold of me, and I grabbed the flashlight from my tool belt, flicked it on, and slowly made my way down. The staircase was narrow, barely wide enough for my shoulders. The steps creaked under my weight, and I had to grip the railing tightly as I descended. I could feel the temperature dropping as I went lower, the air thick with the mustiness of old concrete and something else. Something foul. The stairs seemed to go on forever, but eventually, I reached the bottom. I shined my flashlight around, and what I saw made my heart race. The room was small, barely big enough to hold the concrete floor, for walls and a single old wooden chair bolted to the ground. The chair was the strangest thing about the room. It looked like something out of a horror movie. It was simple, but what caught my eye were the leather restraints bolted to the arms of the chair. They were worn, old, and cracked in places, like they'd been used for years. The room itself was bare, aside from the chair and the light bulb hanging from the ceiling. The walls were smooth concrete, no windows, no decorations. It was like the room had been made for only one thing: the chair. I stepped closer, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. The whole room felt wrong, felt like it had been forgotten for a reason. I couldn't explain it, but I felt like I had made a mistake coming down here. There was something sinister about the room, the chair, the restraints. My flashlight flickered as if in agreement, and I shuddered, almost turning around and climbing back up the stairs right then. But I didn't. I couldn't explain why, but I felt compelled to investigate. I stepped closer to the chair, my flashlight now illuminating the leather straps on the arms. They were old, cracked, stained in places. The bolting into the wood was tight, not something you'd put in a chair just to leave it behind. This wasn't some old piece of furniture. This was something that had been used for what I didn't know. I bent down to get a closer look at the floor beneath the chair, where the concrete was stained in dark patches. I don't know why I hadn't noticed before, but the stains didn't look like simple dirt or dust. They looked like blood, dried up and long left there. My stomach turned, and I stepped back quickly, almost tripping over my own feet. That's when the unease settled into a cold, overwhelming fear. I wasn't alone. Not physically, but in a way I couldn't explain. I knew that something had been here before me. Someone or something had been down here, strapped to that chair. Maybe it was just the air, thick with age and fear, but I couldn't shake the feeling that this room hadn't been forgotten because it was harmless. I wanted to leave. I should have turned around right then and gone back upstairs, locked the door, and forgotten all about it. But my mind wouldn't let me. I had to understand. I had to know what this was. I searched the concrete walls for any clues. There was nothing at first. Then I found something. A small, faded mark on one wall, as if something had been scratched into the surface. At first, I thought it was just wear and tear, but as I ran my fingers over it, I could feel the faint grooves. It was almost like writing, but the letters were so worn that I couldn't make any sense of them. Only one word was clear, etched deep into the concrete: stay. I took a step back, my heart pounding. My eyes scanned the room, but nothing made sense. The only thing I could think of was that someone had been kept here, tied to that chair, for some reason I couldn't even begin to fathom. The walls seemed to close in around me, and I suddenly realized that I didn't want to know why the room existed or what had happened here. The only thing I knew for sure was that I needed to leave. I scrambled up the stairs, not daring to look back. The door slammed shut behind me, and I bolted the steel door back into place, never once looking down at the dark space beneath the floor. I didn't know what I had just uncovered, and I didn't want to know. I left the cabin that night, locking it up tight behind me. I haven't been back since, and I don't think I ever will. The worst part isn't what I found down there. It's the thought that someone, maybe even more than one person, had been down there before me. The chair, the restraints, the marks on the wall. It all told a story I didn't want to hear. As for the cabin, it's still there, decaying slowly into the earth. But sometimes, in the dead of night, I think about what could be hidden beneath the floor, and I wonder if someone will ever find it again.